Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Ford, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Indiana, and this is this session on captioning legislative webcasts. I'll be moderating the session today. I do have a couple of brief announcements before we get started, though. Our session today is being streamed live on the web with the help of the Ohio channel. Welcome to those who are viewing our session online. Recording of the session will also be made available on the Ohio channel website for viewing on demand after the meeting. Presentations and handouts for our session will also be available on the NCSL Legislative Summit website and on the NCSL app. Since the camera will be live throughout the session, I'd like to remind all the panelists and to please speak into your microphones. And for those of you in the audience, when we get to the question portion at the end, if you please can come up towards the front, you'll see microphones on two different sides. You can ask your questions from there. Increasingly, states are providing captions for the deaf and hearing impaired as part of their live webcasts of legislative proceedings. Today we'll hear about how that's done. We'll look into live stream captioning, archiving of caption recordings, necessary software, support on mobile devices and browsers, potential impact on remote testimony, using closed captioning for verbatim journals, and many other issues. In Indiana, we started to provide closed captioning services for our live streams in 2015 on a limited basis. Last session for 2017 was the first session where we provided closed captioning support on all of our video streams and all of our archived content. From July 2016 through June of 2017, we provided over 1,159 hours of captioned content. We utilize a third-party service that provides live captioners for all of our streams. They require a 48-hour notice for each meeting, except during conference committees where we have two captioners ready to provide captioning services at a moment's notice. So we basically pay them in advance to basically be there, whether they're captioning or not, so we can pick up those meetings quickly. That was something we actually just added this last year. Once the stream is ended, they provide us with a captioning file. We do some minor editing on that file. We will check it for any misspelled words, some basic spell checking, verify that all the names were actually spelled correctly. Then we resync the captioning text with a video and upload to our website as archive content. So it's a fairly automated process at this point. Doesn't require a whole lot of hands-on effort in Indiana to make this stuff happen. And a lot of that work is handled in the House and Senate chambers by staff on the other side. We do have a third-party vendor we also work with that's actually funded by the state of Indiana that provides streaming services to all executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branches of government. So they provide all of our encoders, our bricks, our streaming servers, and then we just kind of tack everything else on the end of that. We still pay for that on the back end, of course, through our budget, but it is kind of provided for us. Our first speaker today is going to be Paul Pack. Paul is the Chief Information Officer for the Massachusetts Legislature and has served in this role for the past 5 years. Paul previously served as IT Operations Director for Grand Circle Corporation and as the IT Software Development Manager for Kronos Incorporated. He is responsible for the legislature's technology roadmap and works with the legislature to foster and support their vision and capacity for IT innovation and change. Paul graduated with a BS from UMass Amherst and enjoys running, working with startups, and spending time with his family and friends. Paul?
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Paul Pack. I'm Paul Pack, and I'm the CIO for the state legislature of Massachusetts. So today, I just want to thank you for coming to this session. I know you have a lot of sessions to choose from, and I want to thank the panelists and the moderator just for speaking briefly with you today. So today, I got asked to open this particular session and sort of go over the bigger picture, specifically as it relates to how Massachusetts is using captioning technology and incorporating that into their legislative webcasts. But before I can do that and answer sort of the whys, I think it's important to give a little bit of a background as to how this came about, at least from the context of Massachusetts. So back in 2007, the Disability Policy Consortium, known as DPC, as well as the General Court of Massachusetts, which is the legislature and who I report to, they basically worked closely to produce a formal agreement. And this agreement was literally, it was an important agreement that achieved two really important initiatives, or two outcomes. The first of which was, it was a commitment by the legislature to basically adhere to Title II of the American Disabilities Act. And specifically, as it relates to me, as the head of IT, Section 508, which deals with the websites and the technologies related to that. And that was important. And basically, it allowed them to basically say, hey, this is a priority for us. And the legislature since then has never looked back. You know, they look at transparency and accessibility as two sort of focal points that go hand in hand. And I'll touch upon those a little bit on with an example. And the second important outcome of that agreement in 2007 was the establishment of an ADA coordinator position. So here in Massachusetts, we're very fortunate to have an actual ADA coordinator. The role of that coordinator is to basically be responsible for all the accessible initiatives that are available at the State House. And the person that they appointed at that time, his name is Carl Richardson, and I'm happy to say that Carl is still the coordinator as of this day. So my team and I, we work pretty closely with this coordinator, with Carl, to make sure that all of the technology that we put in place, the websites, the mobile applications, anything that we work on, we make sure that they are ADA compliant. And Carl is a very, very good resource for that. He's actually a deafblind user, and he provides very tacit feedback for us. So we are, again, very lucky to have that sort of there. So, so there's to the whys we do this, there's a very important reason, and we really kind of took it upon ourselves to make sure that this is something that we carry forward. So from the past up to the present, we basically have provided open captions for all of our live broadcasts, as well as on our archive media. So all of the video sessions of our archived video sessions are open captioned. And I'm particularly excited about this because right at this time, it sort of coincided with this event. We are actually just about to release something that we're pretty excited about and that I'll demo to you in a moment. But just to kind of go over what the hows and whys of what we're doing right now. So as of the moment, live broadcasts are open captioned, and we do that with the help of a CART provider. So a lot of you may be familiar with this, but CART is basically, it stands for Communications Access Translation, real-time translation. And as the name would suggest, CART enables us to have instant or near instant translation of the spoken word in an actual event. So we work with our CART provider. We work with a provider who's been with us for the past 10 years, and they basically produce a live caption stream that's made accessible by a URL. So via web address, you can actually see that caption stream. So what our video team, our broadcast teams do is they actually use an encoder to overlay that stream and caption text on top of the video. And that's when you actually see our live broadcast events. Our archives are available to the public on our site, and they're also available, individually as files or as DVDs upon request. When we do sort of provide that thing as needed, they are with open captions on them. So these are the things that we've actually done in the past up till now, but it actually was time for a change. A couple of years ago, we kind of started this multi-phase initiative to kind of change up what we are doing. And part of it is reusing a little bit of what we already have in place. So for instance, the CART providers, they end up providing us with a transcript file, and that's important for us in what we're going to do a little bit later on. But that's provided to us. CART for us is typically a service that costs anywhere from $60 to $200. It's similar to what Jeff mentioned. These are folks who are kind of paid to be ready, and they work with us whenever we have sessions or it overruns. And these are folks who provide that service to us. So open captions was something that we had, but we wanted to make sure that closed captions was something that we were trying to aspire to and get to. So a couple years back, we looked at that, and we kind of did the multi-phase approach I was talking about. The first step was really to just look at our website, look at the foundation of it, see what could be improved before we could even address the captioning aspect. And what we came up with is through some feedback forums, through Survey Monkeys, through hallway conversations with members and staff, with webmaster feedback that was provided via our site, our then public site, via webmaster email. What we found is that users were not only interested in actually the legislative documents themselves, the bills, the general laws, the session laws. What they were really particularly interested in was, how does that legislation get moved? And what happens during these actual legislative processes. So for example, if they were able to search the text of an actual formal session or a committee hearing, they would know who is a champion for or against a particular item. And this was something that we couldn't provide at the time, so we really kind of did it in multi-phase. The first phase was just to revamp the website, and the website basically has sort of it's a focus around the end user, and I can show you quickly what the homepage looks like. So the focus of the website is literally just to show you, it's sort of like Google in that the first thing you see, front and center, is a searchable text. So that search engine is literally there to provide you with a deep search into everything that's on the site. And there's also the concept of what we call a mega menu. Literally, this menu is there to provide one-click access to pretty much 85–90% of what's on our site. Everything on our site was designed to be just a few clicks away. So this, in conjunction with the search engine, we thought that we had a pretty good basis for what we wanted to do with captioning going forward. So kind of fast forward to today, what we've been able to do is actually provide, for the first time, what is an interactive transcript. And again, this is not something terribly new, but it's new for us. What we've pretty much been able to do is just show that if you actually go to our site, and for example, this is the budget of this year, you'll notice that there are two kinds of archived media. So archived is just the regular old archive session that we had in the past, and there's a delineation for an advanced version. So that enhanced version is what I'm going to show you today. So this enhanced version of the site looks like any other part of the site in terms that has a video, but you'll notice that one of the first things that are different about it is that it actually has the transcript available right below it. And there's a search box right there. So if I were to actually start clicking on this video, one of the things that you'll notice is that there are captions, the transcript is right below. And if I were to go into the actual video itself, it'll actually highlight what they're speaking in blue. And so everything that's passed will be in blue, and everything that's yet to be spoken will follow along in real time. And every one of these words is hyperlinkable. So for example, if I wanted to click on Braintree, it'll jump to that portion of the video, and it'll allow that to continue. Transcripts allow you to search for different key terms. So for example, if I wanted to search on proposal, it'll actually show me time marks on wherever the proposal is actually, the word or term proposal is available. You can search on multiple terms, you can put them in quotes to catch phrases, but this was a pretty big step forward for us, and this is something that we've allowed to happen or developed in conjunction with the IT team. And the video is now in high def for the first time for us, and it will soon be streaming in 1080p. The reason why this is really the next phase for us is because we actually had some, and Jeff alluded to this in the intro, there are some legislative things that I think that this could really help us with. And one of those things is basically with the actual acts of journals. So right now, journals are sort of a minute-by-minute sort of a summary of what happens and transpires in a formal session. This would potentially replace that. If you were to apply an algorithm to that, you could literally sort of either augment the existing journals or sort of kind of have get pretty far into establishing them and automating that for the clerk's offices so that they can provide that. And all of this is, again, towards that ultimate far-reaching goal of transparency, the time to market, the time that we can get this information out to the public, and the accessibility of it all. Closed captions is finally enabled for us as well. So if I were to full screen this video, you'll see that we have closed captioning available to us in English. This is actually interesting because you can actually set the different font sizes. You can actually set the background color. So the reason why this is important is, again, for our accessible users, we want to make sure that this is something that's available to them. And if you're not wanting the captions, you can turn the captions off, and you can actually see the title graphics and all of the, the video and what it was originally designed to be presented as. So that's what we are doing currently, and that's what we are striving to continue. So for live sessions right now, other than the fact that they will be streamed in HD, the way we're actually rolling this out is we're actually going to be every future session that happens, we're going to actually have that within 24 hours be in enhanced archive, interactive transcript, and we're going to slowly work our way back to the very beginning. It's going to take some time, but we're going to work ourselves back to the very beginning. So for the interest of staying on point and on time for the other panelists, I can go into great detail as to how we are doing this. We do work with third-party providers. We are working with some specialized folks on this to produce this, but I can take those in the Q&A. Right.
Thanks, Paul. Our next speaker is going to be Bruce Ellsworth. Bruce is the Digital Media Manager of the South Carolina Legislative Services Agency. Bruce began his IT career in the early 90s and for over 20 years worked with Amatrace, Inc., a small digital video integration and design build firm based out of Atlanta, Georgia. In that capacity, he worked with diverse clientele ranging from individual small business owners to educational institutions and government agencies all over the U.S. to provide best-of-breed solutions aimed at live video production tools, robotic camera control, cable TV distribution, web streaming, and digital communications. In May of 2015, Bruce joined the Legislative Services Agency full-time and now brings his extensive experience with leading-edge multimedia and audiovisual technology to the public sector. Bruce?
Excuse me a moment. I'll start with full disclosure. This is not what I do. Public speaking is not my forte. If you want me to push some buttons or pull some wires, I'm your guy. But I was asked to give this talk today to kind of show you guys the technical solution that South Carolina has developed sort of from scratch. We've been a pioneer for some time in web streaming. As part of as part of my research, I actually ran across this meme that I found so funny I had to share it. Have you ever noticed that all the dishes and telescopes searching for intelligent life are pointed away from Earth? And I figured if you don't take anything else away from the conference, at least you got a good laugh. All right, so like I mentioned, South Carolina, we've actually been streaming video from our website since the late 90s, 1999. And we've actually had the House and Senate both available on the website as live streams since 2001. To kind of show you where we are today, you notice we have about 11,000 total connections on our peak day, which was April 26th this year. And on an average day, we get about 1,500 connections, all served out of our data center. We do not use a content delivery network. We do not use any third parties to publish our media. This is all served out of our own infrastructure. Notice we had about 582 simultaneous viewers on that peak day. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of the scale that we're dealing with. And my focus today, even though I've been asked to try to keep this high level, there are technical aspects to streaming and to captioning that we have to touch on just to even be able to discuss the subject intelligently. So if I get out in the weeds, I will try to avoid that and talk about more of the high level. But we did not get there in one day. You can see from these pictures of our data center in 2002, we had kind of very humble beginnings. My favorite part is the pink chair and the yellow cabinet there. So that was our data center. And today, we've actually built out a world-class facility. Everything is racked properly. Everything is powered with dual power. We have proper cooling. We have enough capacity for network and storage and compute to be able to handle all of the new demands that we're making on our system with all of the new media that we've been adding to our system. You might notice in the very back some little displays back there. This is a better image of that, where you can actually see our command and control center for all of our video feeds. We found that this was necessary with the growing number of committees that we're handling all simultaneously. We had to have a way to do quality of service monitoring for video and audio for all of our feeds. So, we're talking today about captioning, but at the basis of captioning, before you can even get there, you have to be able to distribute video. to everyone. And there are a lot of different ways that you can do that. The way we've chosen to do it, because we started so early, is we've actually built a homegrown solution from the ground up. I mean, before anybody was out there trying to do this as a off-the-shelf solution, we were out there actually putting this together. So you can see, even as early as 1996, we did have a web presence. Again, humble beginnings. It looks kind of like something you'd see from a school website. But again, this is 1996. This was cutting edge. Just being able to watch streaming video from the website was something new. This is kind of a timeline of some of the technology milestones. I'm not going to go into detail about a lot of it. Just I'll say that they've won some awards along the way. They've made a lot of they've done a lot of things before a lot of other people. We've been kind of a pioneer. So again, 2002, you can actually see at the top for the video, you can actually watch the House and Senate, which for the first time allowed people to choose which live feed they wanted to watch. Before that, they were watching South Carolina educational television, whichever feed that they wanted to carry. Kind of a later version of the site, even closer to what we have today. Just improvements in searchability, accessibility, and then with our most recent site, we actually added on dashboards for the House and Senate so that we could follow the chamber debate. We added social media capability, of course, providing live streaming as we did since 2000. And then we also added, for the first time in 2014, the ability to actually see captions. So we started captioning about 4 years ago. This is kind of a view of our command and control system. We call this VenCon, or Video Encoder Controller. This was part of the development of the solution that we put together as a custom system. At the very top, you can see there's a thumbnail view of the one stream that's going out right now. This is actually tied to our database and our backend, which allows us to schedule jobs for each of the events or meetings that's upcoming. And you can see on the following days little thumbnails of the events that are coming up. So as a meeting is coming online, the system will automatically figure out when it needs to spool up an encoder. It'll do that about an hour before the broadcast begins, so that if there is a technical issue, there's actually time to have it either spin up another encoder or figure out what the problem is. But the system is completely automated. It actually tracks to see if there's a technical issue. It's doing quality of services monitoring on its own. And it even generates alerts if there's something that it can't fix automatically, so that it will tell us if we need to actually go check something out. But essentially what this has done for us, where before we had a dedicated encoder for every single room, we now can pull all those encoders together and use them as backups for each other. So it reduces the overall cost of having a solution that can do this many streams at once, because effectively, even though we have 16 different venues where we can have meetings, we effectively really only have about 6 at max going on concurrently. But we have the capability to do up to 14 at once if we had to. If we stress the system to the limit, that's how many we can handle with the hardware that we have. If there is a problem with the hardware, the system will automatically detect that, put it into maintenance mode, take it out of the system, and then roll over any existing streams that are still going onto the next available encoder. So we're pretty proud of what we've been able to accomplish here, building something completely from scratch and not using third-party developments and being tied and dependent to those third-party developments. So if you were starting from scratch today, you would not have to build everything yourself. You actually could use some of the off-the-shelf systems available from Slick. That's a partner with International Roll Call, but they're also obviously their own entity. They provide full-blown service for streaming, for captioning, everything. And then there's the Granica system, which is similar, but possibly not as good. And then you'll notice down at the bottom we have the cloud-based content delivery platform. So if you're starting and you don't want to have any footprint in your facility at all, you can pretty much start with YouTube and publish out to their platform. I'm not even going to explain this. Again, we're trying to keep this sort of high level, but I wanted to include it in the presentation so that if anybody has questions about our solution, about the way that we've architected the system, it's there. You can ask me questions later, either in the Q&A or whenever you want to implement something like this. but it shows the topology, the network cabling, the structure, all of the components that are involved. You can see it's quite a complex system. So again, we're trying to keep this simple and high level, but there is a lot going on behind the scenes that you do need to be aware of if you're going to try to tackle this. All right, so this is just kind of a top-down description of some of the features of the system that we've designed. We've arrived at this kind of incrementally, so we didn't really start out with this as a plan and try to get there, but we've been adding on features incrementally over time to make the system more robust, have high availability, have a lot of automation, a lot of integration with our existing tools so that it reduces the impact on our workflow and on our personnel to be able to handle this many feeds going on at the same time. So we're kind of getting into more of the technical aspects of the solution. What I'm showing here is if you were starting completely from scratch, didn't really want to make a huge investment, you could just go completely third party and have an external content delivery network, provide all of your streams, all of your captions, and you could basically start out with just a web encoder, which could be as simple as a laptop with Flash Media Live encoder on it to be able to push the feed to them. And then there are other solutions that allow you to add captions to that. But you don't really need any huge investment. The big disadvantage of a system like this is that anybody that is in your facility that's watching the stream from inside your network, it's going to cause a lot of loading on your network to be able to hit this external entity and pull their streams into your network. So this is why we did not go this route. Our system looks more like this, where everything is on-premise, and we have a cluster of machines that handle all of the video traffic, being able to handle the number of connections that I showed you at the first slide. You notice that the public viewers and the private viewers are all on the same network. However, we have dedicated machines that kind of push things in different directions. Okay? This is more of what we're trying to get to solve some network bandwidth issues. Our solution is really good for high traffic inside our network, but not necessarily a lot of high traffic outside of our network. So if we have even more public viewers than what we have right now, then we would either have to increase the amount of bandwidth that we have available going out, or we can then stage up the public viewers on a third-party CDN and use the CDN to kind of handle the load and take that load off of our network. The rest of the system is pretty much the same. So getting into the actual caption ingest, I'm illustrating here one of the methods that you can use to actually get captions into the Wowza streaming solution. This system is actually going directly into Wowza from the caption encoder. So this is using an on-premise encoder that's TV compatible. So if you're also pushing captions to local televisions on closed circuit network or even going out to broadcast, you can actually do that with a system like this. Essentially, the way it works is in your meeting rooms, you have either somebody sitting in the room transcribing, so they're actually hearing the content as it's going on in the room, or you have an audio connection coming out of the room and being pushed to a transcriptionist that's off-site, and then they're connected back to your system via the internet to talk to your encoder, your caption encoder. And then the caption encoder can then push those captions alongside the video that's coming from your web streaming system so that you get video, audio, and captions at the same time. The next slide, this is similar, but this is actually, this is going through the encoder, the web encoder, to provide the caption source. Instead of going directly from the caption encoder to the web streaming solution, this is actually going video out to the caption encoder, the captions get embedded, and then it goes to the web encoder, which then handles video, audio, and captions all in one. This requires higher-end encoders, but this is kind of where you'd want to get to if you're at enterprise level, where you really want to be able to have something that's going to work long-term with high bandwidth, high availability, things like that. And notice I even put the closed-circuit TVs on there in case you want to push captions to your closed-circuit system as well. So again, this is all on-premise. One of the exciting things that I actually found while doing research for this is something new, this just in 2017. The same company that provides the hardware encoders that we use also now has a cloud-based solution that if you're not interested in captions for closed circuit, but you are interested in web captions, then you can use a solution like this to keep the captioning portion of the system off-premise. This is all low bandwidth. There's really no impact to your network to use a solution like this. And the advantage is that it's completely scalable because you don't have to buy a new encoder for every channel that you want to add on. You literally just tell the software that you want to add another channel and it does it for you. So all of the hardware involved to make this work is handled off-site by a third party, EEG, which is kind of the leader in providing captioning solutions. You can see from their diagram, this is actually copied from their documentation. They have a lot of partners that actually provide external transcription that you can choose to go through. So you hire somebody on the top of that list, they then talk to your virtual captioning hardware, and then that pushes the captions to your stream, okay? So now we get to sort of the why we would want to do this. Getting away from the technical discussion, this is more about why we should bother to spend the money to accomplish this in the first place. So what you'll notice from this table is that we have ages 65 and over, almost 30% are either hearing impaired or deaf. And this number is going to keep growing as we have more baby boomers aging. And this is just kind of illustrating where we're going. This is not something that's going to go away. This is the US statistics, but you can also get a breakdown from the same sites I referenced at the bottom there for your state. So you should definitely check that out. So the other issue is that captioning is not really just for the hearing impaired and the deaf. There are actually there's a benefit to everyone. Just like Paul mentioned, the metadata search is a big application. So for searchability, convenience, transparency, and inclusiveness, those are kind of my buzzwords for why we should be doing this. These are the benefits. There are also a lot of obstacles. Obviously, there is the initial cost, capital investment in equipment. You do have recurring costs for transcriptionists. You do also need to have generally more IT support personnel. They may have to be specially trained in the equipment that they're using. You may also, instead of using a third-party transcriptionist team, you may hire dedicated personnel that handle the transcription for you on site. So that's another possible cost. And then technology is a big challenge because, as you saw from the things we saw earlier, there are a lot of components. There's a lot of different brands that have to work together. Sometimes that's a challenge. Not all brands are the same. You're not going to be able to accomplish streaming with captions with just anything off the shelf. So you have to be careful what technology you're choosing and how you're putting it together to make all of this work. So really, why we should do this, empowerment, since doing nothing disenfranchises a sizable population segment, the deaf and hard of hearing, which, as I said, is growing. Compliance, because the FCC, which in the past only regulated programs on broadcast TV, now are also regulating programs that originate on the web only, and that's going to keep increasing as well. Accessibility, because it's a lot easier if you can do metadata search, even for people that are not hard of hearing or deaf, to be able to find the media in multiple mediums. If you can find it in text copy, it's easier to search. If you can find it in video, it's easier to see and hear what's going on. Those all are things that add to openness and transparency. And honestly, the cost, while it can be significant or seemingly so, for point of reference, in 2014, WBTW.com noted that just one legislative session day in South Carolina cost taxpayers approximately $34,000 just to have a legislative session day. So on the grand scheme of things, the scale, it's not that significant. We definitely should do this. So in closing, I just wanted to share with you some of the resources that I found. Like I mentioned earlier, EEG is kind of a market leader in captioning. They provide a lot of hardware, a lot of software, and also the transcription ICAP service, which allows remote transcriptionists to log into your captioning system and actually provide captions. So I will turn it over to Jeff.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Okay, our next speaker today is going to be Sanjeev Menezes. Sanjeev is the CEO and founder of Slick Media Technologies, which has been serving the legislative, broadcast, and entertainment industries with internet-scale cloud streaming solutions since 1999. Sanjeev has been the founder or on the founding team of many successful technology companies in the domain of software, telecommunications, and fiber optics since 1985. As a well-regarded subject matter expert on media asset management, Sanjeev is regularly called upon to speak at industry conferences and provide technical and operational expertise to legislative bodies worldwide. Sanjeev.
Thanks, Jeff. So where do I find my slide deck here? Do you know by chance where I found it?
Minimize that. Did you load them? Are you on the desktop there?
Okay, which one is mine? So here we go. Okay. So first, I'd like a show of hands of how many people here are technical. Okay, pretty good. That's over half the audience, because I've been asked to respond to some very technical issues, and I just don't want to put anyone to sleep here. So, as Bruce had mentioned, that my company makes a platform for streaming that handles closed captioning and a lot of technical issues around it, and we solve it in a lot of innovative ways with server-side software, but there's other ways to do it as well. So I'm going to describe some of the issues that are commonly faced, and this is not going to be a product pitch, but probably if you have more technical questions, you could come and see me after or in the Q&A. So first off, these are the three issues that I'm going to deal with today. First is resyncing of closed captions with video after an event. So, for example, it's rescheduled, or you're going to trim a little bit, you have a problem resyncing it after an event. Next is the policy on editing captions for archive files. If you want to go in after the fact, there's the policy and also the technical aspect of how do you actually do this. And how do you do this on a larger scale? If you have a lot of meetings going on, you have all these little things to edit, how do you do this efficiently? And finally, what's the policy on archive webcasts with transcripts that we see? So let's see. So that's not just the captions, but the actual transcripts, and possibly verbatim transcripts. So I'm going to start by defining what's the difference between subtitles and closed captions. And it makes a minor difference, especially in the editing. So the subtitles, dialogue only, who spoke, and what they said. Closed captions includes a little bit of context. For example, a bill might be spoken about, some noises, you know, in a TV show it would be describing music or events that are happening, scene changes, things like that. So closed captions are a little bit more descriptive than pure subtitles. So on to my first subject. It's the resyncing of closed captions with a video of archive files. So why is this important and why is this a problem? What we often see is that some of our customers had built homegrown solutions, or some other commercial solutions use off-the-shelf encoders or off-the-shelf media servers such as Wowza or an Elemental server or whatever, and it creates an archive file of your webcast while you're webcasting, and regardless of how you got your captions into it, that it's all bundled together. So the audio, video, captions are all interleaved together into a single MPEG-4 file, and if you want to lop off 30 seconds or 80 seconds at the beginning and regenerate that file, well, there's no simple way to do it, or at least no simple way to do it in volume. So first off, let's talk about the workflow of doing it. There's the caption generation. It could be manual or computer assisted. How do the captions actually get into the stream? Gets inserted into the video stream in a number of ways. As Bruce had showed a few ways that it can go into the stream. Where there's no actual insertion of the closed captions into an output stream. Like it never has to go to a television, never has to go to a recorder, never has to go to an analog feed or an SDI output, where it's purely digital. That there's actually a terminology for it. It's called e-captioning. So it stays within the digital domain inside an MPEG-4 file or inside Adobe Premiere or MOV file or whatever it is. There's ways of doing that, and it's quite different if it gets embedded in your SDI stream and then encoded later into the MPEG-4 file. There's different ways of doing that. So the insertion is quite important. Finally is the capture by the encoder, streaming it and treating the closed captions as metadata, which is quite important as well if you want to be doing searching after the fact, if you want Google to index the metadata as searchable video, if you want to do something innovative like Paul is doing and Massachusetts is doing, which is more or less the video karaoke, pardon me, where it follows, no bouncing ball there, but it was very, very cool to see how closely you could match the text to the video. But it's equally important to actually be able to find it, because in a 7-hour meeting, if you have this huge transcript, if you didn't make it so that Google could search it and interlink it, that it's not as effective. So these are the workflows, and you've seen some hints on how they're done from the other speakers, and you'll see some more on what happens. And the challenge is that you end up with a single monolithic file, possibly with the captions inserted into them. And if you're lucky, you get a sidecar file, as it's called. So you get 2 files with the captions in them, timestamps. If you're really lucky, you've got them into a database and where they're searchable by your own website search engine, and you've published them in a format that's Google friendly, in a sitemap, XML, timestamp, all that kind of stuff. Most likely, depending on your tool chain, you just have this MPEG-4 file, so this MP4 file with inside of it the closed captions. Problem with that is the MP4 file is not time of day. It's starting at 0, and so every little fragment in there, including your timestamps for the closed captions, are offset from 0. So if your meeting was 2:04 and 13 seconds, you took off 11 seconds, there's all kinds of math that has to happen to re-edit that file. So this is complex. So let me first describe to you how we do it. It's quite different from this monolithic file. We store everything when we ingest it, so we have our own encoder that we've written from scratch. We store everything much like an Adobe Premiere or iMovie timeline, where every fragment of video, every 2 seconds, we're storing a little slice of it in multiple resolutions. So if you want a very high resolution for a long-term archive, a streaming resolution, a couple of streaming resolutions, a proxy edit resolution, so for sharing on social media, multiple audio tracks, multiple closed captioning tracks, metadata such as who spoke, bill IDs, all that kind of stuff. We store this on a timeline separately with actual time of day, not 0 offset. So what we have is called a ring buffer. It's a loop recording buffer with multiple tracks, from which when we assemble an archive that we just cut out the part we want, we make a composition. So if you use a video editor, even you're making your vacation video, you put all kinds of things on a timeline, you have a render command. The render command creates the output file for you. So we have the equivalent of that. Now, we've invested many man years into this. You probably don't have the equivalent of that. So, this is how we do it, is all captions, timestamp word by word, Captions are separate from the media files, and the media files themselves are separate by different video tracks, by resolution, different audio tracks. So we have customers who have 8 or 10 audio channels. So for example, the International Maritime Organization or a few other ones use many translators. And when we generate our output, we're able to generate multiple outputs in multiple formats, SRT files, WebVTT files. Does anyone know what that is? Those are text files with the captions timestamped within them, and multiple MPEG-4 files, all from the same ring buffer for the same period of time. So compositions are really easy. You're going to have a much harder time to do it yourself. So before I go on to the next question, the next question that I've got to address, let me describe to you how you would do it if you had to do it yourself. Probably, if you don't want to use Adobe Premiere Pro, which is really quite cumbersome to edit captions, so you could load an MPEG-4 file in there, has a nice caption editor. You have a problem there when you go to render the output, it might re-encode the entire thing. If your input resolution doesn't match the output resolution, or there are certain rules it follows to try to not re-encode, but it's cumbersome. So there's a tool called FFmpeg, which allows you to demux, so demultiplex, so unwind all of the audio and video tracks separately, then cut them up, and you're going to have to script cutting out the captions. They're 0 time based. So for example, if you have a 1 hour file, started at 2 o'clock, you want to take off the first 15 minutes, you're going to have to do some time math. You'll end up with a bunch of output files, which you'll have to re-multiplex again together. So most of that could be done by FFmpeg. Bunch of scripting. So if you have to do a very large volume of this kind of stuff, that's how you do it. It also gives you the opportunity at that point of looking at the text file, the SRT file, which kind of answers this next part of this, this presentation, is how do you edit it? You have a simple file, that's a text file, that's time-stamped. You could do the edits in that if you had to, using this kind of tool. If it's a very infrequent action, you could also use Adobe Premiere Pro and possibly Final Cut. I'm not 100% sure if Final Cut does it. So on the subject of editing captions after the fact, there's 2 aspects of that. One is the technical policy. So are you really willing to invest in either doing it manually, which is a whole bunch of work and a whole bunch of time, and you need this edit station that's a pretty beefy video workstation, hopefully with some SSD storage on there, all that kind of stuff. So will you be willing to invest in that? And the second is, will you be willing to invest the time to babysit this slightly fragile workflow? If not, you might want to find an external video provider. So there are people who actually produce videos and spend their entire lifetimes in front of Avid or Final Cut or whatever. And they understand the tool chains to produce this stuff. From time to time, send them the file, say, hey, can you change these 3 words? They'll do it for you, send back the files. Can't recommend anyone, but there's many providers who could do that kind of thing. So that's the technical policy. Second is procedural. So is it even allowable in the way that you treat your archives to change it after the fact? That's up to you. So that's nothing that we could dictate. We're just an enabler of technology. So our tools enable both of these scenarios. So the technical policy with our platform for edits, it's really an operator action where our staff does it. Customer puts in a request, it's executed within a business day, less urgent services required, and it's simply executed on the back end. We have the tools and tool chain to do this kind of stuff. The procedural policy by our customers, we see editing of captions very rarely done. The exception is really when closed captions are used as the starting basis of verbatim transcripts. Usually what happens is the captions are extracted in real time, not from the streams, but from the broadcast signal. So that's in broadcast terms, the line 21, so the blinking lines you used to see on analog TVs, or what they call CEA 708 on your digital formats, which is pure digital. So it's from the broadcast facilities. There's de-embedders, which pull out the closed caption, our tools slice it up into 5-minute segments. Customers have some scripting to fix the punctuation, the capitalization, to recognize speaker changes, subject changes, that kind of thing. Create a Microsoft Word template document from it, and then they start their transcripts from that. So we see, not so much in the United States, but internationally, especially in Commonwealth countries, probably about 15 to 20% of our customers do that, and primarily it's done with the chambers, so not so much for committees. So that's the process for closed caption edits. So we very, very rarely see edits done and then put back into the archive file, so where there was a problem with live. The exceptions are very, very rare when something really bad happened. Something really bad went out on the air. So the policy on archive webcasts with transcripts. So what we see generally is that in Canada, Commonwealth, it's very common that the verbatim transcripts are produced along with the archives. And like I said, that the rate is probably no more than 15%. USA, extremely rare. Municipal, never. And it's really cost-driven. And the most popular driver is the chamber, and where there's hot legislation or question period, for example, if you have the equivalent of that. So that's it for what I have to say today, and any questions you could ask me a question period. Thanks.
Thank you. Our final speaker today is going to be Daniel Kerr. Daniel is the Director of Technology for Swaggart Productions, LLC, a leading provider of hands-free streaming and broadcast solutions for municipalities. Daniel's innovative and inventive can-do attitude is typical of his native New Zealand, and he loves a challenge to prove it. Prior to joining Swaggart, Daniel designed and built infrastructure for Video AXS, a .com provider for streaming video for TV and newspapers. Daniel's multidisciplinary career spans system network administration, InfoSec, and software development, with further roles in leading telecom, payment processing, and SaaS companies. Daniel.
All right. Hi, folks. I'm sure there'll be some overlap from my distinguished peers here, but I think that's okay because I understand there'll be a test afterwards, so it'll help you with that. Just a little intro. Swaggart's been in business since 2003, but I think I can safely say that in the last 6 months, we've had more inquiries for closed captioning than we have in that entire 14 years. So I think it's a great topic to be speaking on, and I am happy for the opportunity to do so. So just an overview of the talk. We'll talk about why we caption, the state of the industry, where captioning efforts are at currently, both in the municipal market and the legislative market, unique challenges that we think apply to state legislatures, and some solutions for moving forward. So as we've touched on, it seems like the main reason for captioning is accessibility for those that are hard of hearing. 36 million roughly Americans, that's 10%, are deaf or hard of hearing. My wife is in that latter group, and in addition to causing arguments, it means I watch a lot of closed caption television, so I hope I'm an authority on the subject. In addition to accessibility, though, there's ancillary benefits. So it allows you to search the spoken word, as we've seen already, provides you with transcripts that can be used for the minutes process or journaling, and allows you to maybe set discussion alerts, so email alerts or social media alerts for people that are interested in particular discussion topics that have occurred or maybe occurring currently. The other sort of main reason that I think that's been driving things, the increased demand in the last 6 months, is changes in the law, or really implementation and enforcement of laws. ADI Title II is the big one, particularly Section 508 thereof, which, in addition to covering web streaming, also covers wider website accessibility. We're starting to see a lot of enforcement from the Department of Justice. One key example is UC Berkeley a few months ago announced they were taking down 20,000 on-demand videos because they just didn't have the budget to justify captioning them. So they're making the decision to take that content offline instead. We're having those same discussions with customers who perhaps don't have the budget for live captioning, want to do on-demand captioning. They're considering taking down their live video feed to make sure that the version they post is captioned. There's further requirements from the FCC. They have different timelines for television and internet, but most of those we find don't apply in this market. It's for TV stations that have revenue over a certain amount, and even then, they're only obligated to spend a certain percentage of their revenue on closed captioning. But it's mostly counties and school districts that we're hearing from. I think they're the ones that are the target of the enforcement more than anything, and it's a difficult subject for them for sure. Streaming internet captions are actually a lot more difficult than television captions. In the television market, there's really just two competing standards, depending on whether you have SD or HD or digital video. And that equipment's all pretty well set and standardized. So you buy one box, it does everything you need as long as it fits within your SD or HD arrangement. When it comes to web streaming, there's a lot more to it, really depending on the technology that you're using. Each new piece of streaming technology, of which they've evolved a long way from Real Media, Windows Media QuickTime, H.264 now, and beyond. Every time we think we kind of have a set standard, it tends to change on us. But each of those has a different method of actually getting captions into the video feed. And so you may have technology that doesn't support it or used to, but now things have moved beyond it. And in that way, it's really an evolving landscape. The reality is there's still work to be done in the market. I think what happened was the switch to HD came maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And a lot of jurisdictions made the adjustment and moved to HD. But at that time, the HD encoders really didn't support closed captioning natively very well. The standards were evolving, but weren't quite set in stone yet. And so you end up with an HD encoder that you may have spent your 5-year budget on, that then doesn't necessarily support closed captioning in the manner that's most appropriate for complete accessibility these days. And the irony is that with SD captioning, it was a lot easier. The captions were carried in the video feed, a little dancing white line maybe at the top that you would see if your TV overscanned it. So even if intermediate devices didn't support captioning, as long as your source did and then the TV on the other end did, you were fine. But with HD, it's moved from using visible captions or captions in the video frame to using carried in different ways through the video containers. But it's a lot more technically advanced, and it also means that almost every step along the way, your equipment needs to support that captioning. So a lot of workarounds were developed. Those include using open captions, really just for the purpose of, as long as your source equipment and your closed caption encoder supported closed captions, they could burn that into the video so that it's always there and it's always carried with the video. But then your streaming encoders didn't need to support it, and onwards to end user devices, you were confident that they would support it because it was right there in the video frame. It works well for that, but the difficulty is then that you can't turn those captions off. And so they start impacting the wider accessibility of your video for people who maybe don't need the captions and don't want to see them. And that's a real issue when you have a presentation or a PowerPoint like this one, and then there's a captions overlaying key parts of the text. So some other workarounds included using a little text box that was maybe separate from the video. But the problem is that it takes up real estate on the web page, still for people that may not need it. Maybe you can turn that off. But that doesn't work well on mobile devices. iPhones by default will want to take video full screen, and then you lose the web page surrounding it, so you don't really see those captions anymore. So you're striving for accessibility but not able to achieve it on mobile devices. Similarly, different technologies had different closed captioning implementations and workarounds. Adobe Flash was a big one. It did really well. It was just an overlay that went over the video. You could have open or closed captions, be able to turn them off. But now Adobe Flash, which was the dominant video format for a very long time, is now deprecated. Adobe themselves have announced they're going to finally drop support for it. Google Chrome did so several months ago. So now you may have what was the state-of-the-art closed captioning solution, but it doesn't work in Google Chrome, which is by far the most popular browser. And it's actually a frustrating experience. And for an audience like this, it can actually drive higher operational costs when you're supporting users who are reporting issues with closed captioning, not working on their devices. You have to then go through the motion of which device do you have, here's what you should try. But ultimately, when you tell someone you can't use Google Chrome anymore, that's a problem because that's over half the market generally. And then when it comes to video platforms where you're actually delivering the video to, they've also been very slow to adopt modern captioning standards. Akamai really only in 2006, and they were the largest CDN, probably still are, certainly for streaming video. They were relatively late, not as late as I guess YouTube thereabouts, but Facebook really is the standout. They're, I'm sure, one of the largest live video platforms, sharing platforms these days. Not that long ago, they started supporting third-party encoders. So, we have customers that we stream to YouTube, but YouTube, or to Facebook, sorry, but Facebook didn't support captioning until very recently. And, it's a conflict for me that, we have customers that are getting sued for not supporting closed captioning, and then YouTube, who have all the money and frankly make a lot of money from advertising revenue from this, and should have been able to support it more readily, don't. Until very recently. But it really comes down to, I think, a chicken and egg problem. Customers were dependent on encoders to support closed captioning. Encoders were then dependent on streaming servers and CDNs that may not have supported closed captioning, may have supported different varieties of closed captioning. The great thing is now that we have the technology. These problems are solved. There are appropriate encoders that will pull closed captions out of the video feed, put it into the streaming video, and make it available in a format that will work well on mobile devices and really cross-platform. But the difficulty is that they're very expensive. When you start looking at the elements that are involved, a closed caption encoder, decoder that takes in a video feed, strips out the audio and makes it available perhaps to an off-site captioning company, brings back in their captions that they provide real-time, injects that back into the video stream, and then that video stream, or video feed, I should say, comes out of the closed caption encoder and is then available for cable television, for CCTV within rooms, and also to go to streaming encoders. But then it's up to the streaming encoder to then pull those captions back out of the SDI or otherwise video signal that they're taking in, and then re-embed those back into the appropriate containers for whatever they're outputting to, whether it's still supporting Adobe Flash because that is necessary on some platforms, or whether it's because HLS, which has a different caption format entirely. So the right equipment, we should say, to do this, the commercial grade equipment, is expensive. The closed caption encoder, decoder, traditionally required a phone line or two, one to provide audio to the remote transcriber, one to bring the captions back in. And that had to be a particular type of phone line. It couldn't just be a PBX line that you broke off of your digital system. It generally had to be an analog phone line that was delivered by the phone company specifically. Sometimes possible, sometimes not. More modern closed caption encoder decoders use the internet, they use IP. The really great ones, EEG we've touched on, is good because it's very firewall friendly. It's smart enough to establish all of its connections outbound to the world. But otherwise quite capable closed caption encoder decoders that support IP need, holes punched in your network. They need port forwards made. You're then giving this third-party access to a resource on your network. And then, $5,000 to $10,000 for those boxes. Then for production quality video encoders, there's maybe a handful of major market ones that now all finally support, the most modern closed captioning standards. But the price of those is $15,000 to $20,000 typically, depending on which one. And that's all per channel. It's one thing, if you just have one channel, or if you're just doing, your house and chamber floors perhaps. But when you start looking at deployments where you have 10 or 12 committee rooms on top of that, it's a much bigger number. And then, the equipment cost sort of pales in comparison often to the recurring expenses. And that's just what it takes to have a third party, whether it's someone that's on site with you, whether it's a remote captioning company to provide that service. Typically, we see rates of between $100 and $150 per hour. Things are baked into that. If you have long meetings, transcribers have to hand off at some point through that meeting. They have to go to the bathroom or whatever. The closed captioning company has to make sure they're available to do that. Typically, they absorb those costs. But the fact is, it's a very highly specialized job. A lot of training goes into becoming a closed captioning transcriber, and I think that's reflected in the hourly rate for it. And that's, the total runtime, including breaks if you're not able to schedule them. So, you may have a meeting that's taking a break. You may have the luxury of knowing that the break's going to be a set amount of time, but there's no guarantee that's going to be the case. If someone's likely to come back early, the risk is that you may miss it and you'll need someone there covering that. Likewise, if they come back late, you've got a transcriber that's on the clock, potentially, and doing nothing. So there's some challenges we think that are unique to legislative market, even different from the municipal market and schools. As I touched on, really lots of rooms. House and Senate floor, maybe at most, is what you'll be captioning initially. But when you're talking about having to cover a number of committee rooms that may all be meeting simultaneously, you're multiplying the numbers we touched on in a lot of cases. Municipal content, legislative meetings are very long form. I can't think of anything that might run longer than it, except maybe a paint drying YouTube channel. And this content only feels like it. It is uniquely different. The breaks of indeterminable length, often you just don't know how long the break is going to be during the meeting, that you need someone sitting there. TV stations, by comparison, typically have one channel each, and they do 3 to 4 hours of live programming per day, whereas the municipality, might have 6 or 8 meetings per month, and then legislature has, that per day often for the extent of their legislative period. So instead of 3 to 4 hours a day, you're talking, thousands of hours perhaps per year. What's also quite unique in this market is the number of homegrown solutions there are that have evolved perhaps based on, budget requirements, technology, refresh schedules. And a lot of those have dependencies. So, you might have integrated your encoders with your scheduling system so that when a meeting's going to start, the encoder's ready to go. It may be tied into your sort of bill tracking system. And it's very difficult to replace those pieces of equipment piecemeal. And really, there's actually a lot of innovation that we see happening in the legislative market, which is great. But in an area like this, it can hold us back a little bit. But ultimately, that's all because of budget, we find. It's doing more with less, and we welcome it for sure. So moving forward, there are improvements in the works. Often there's software upgrades for encoders that will implement these more modern delivery technologies, whether it's new streaming codecs, new closed captioning methodologies. Outside of that, if you have committee rooms that are only going to the web, it reduces the amount of equipment you need considerably. You have the option of not having a closed caption encoder-decoder, which is typically more targeted towards broadcast video. You can instead inject the captions actually after the streaming encoder, just at the video streaming server level. So you have the web-only captions options that really avoids any of the additional capital expenses. And a lot of this, again, is a problem when, maybe you have 14 distinct meeting rooms that traditionally have had their own encoders in them. Realistically, it's better if you can backhaul all of those rooms to one location, because then you can do two things. You can consolidate them on multi-channel encoders, so you certainly save on the per channel amount if you have 4 or more channels on a single encoder. And so bringing all of those channels from the remote committee rooms back to one location is great. And then additionally, scheduling-wise, if you're not using all of those meeting rooms simultaneously, you can aggregate many different channels or many different rooms into a smaller number of channels, which ultimately reduces your equipment costs. There are also a number of cheaper new contribution encoders on the market. In the last couple of years, all of the major kind of video manufacturers have their own cute little box video encoder. They're not necessarily web capable directly. You can't stream out to the world immediately, but if you have an on-site browser server, they can ingest those feeds and then restream them to the world, and you actually save a lot. And it involves maybe some of the physical consolidation that you might have had otherwise. Really the equipment cost, I think, pales in comparison to the ongoing transcription costs. The reality is there's emerging automated transcription technologies out there. A lot of even just human transcription companies use speech recognition technology. So instead of having to have a very specialized shorthand typist, someone's just listening to the meeting in real time, and somehow, my brain couldn't do it, but actually speaking back into a computer system that's trained for their voice in particular. That technology is pretty well established. It's been around for a long time. And it was that way just because it's hard to train a computer system to understand a lot of different speakers. It needs to often be specialized training for that unique speaker. But with the application of machine learning technology over the last couple of years, things have improved in that area considerably, so that there's now commercial solutions that can do automated transcription to a suitable degree for much lower cost, typically an upfront cost, often maybe not even a recurring or a much lower recurring cost. The target for transcription is often 97% accuracy. That's the human transcription company's self-imposed target. And certainly they meet that. But I think the threshold might be lower. If you're talking about meeting rooms that are less important, it's just a matter of making sure that someone gets some benefit out of it. If you can understand what's going on in the room, to me that's sufficient. Early attempts, YouTube automated closed captioning was unintelligible, and it was only worth watching because it was hilarious. As recently as 2 years ago, I think, with the introduction of machine learning technology, it's now to the point that you can really get the gist of what's being discussed. And, I think, perhaps that's enough for an area where the alternative is no closed captioning. But now current solutions are being widely deployed in the market by television stations. And really they make occasional mistakes, and there's a lot that goes into that. The mistakes that are made are often on unknown or new words, so street names, place names, people names. Realistically, those are probably the more important terms when it comes to meetings. But the technology is vastly improved and continues to. Research technology is roughly at 95%, but further breakthroughs are being made daily on that. It's a big area of investment for all of the big cloud and computing companies, as well as other independent researchers. This is, I think, one of the big applications for machine learning. Humans make mistakes as well. This is an example of one from New Zealand, where there were some rubberneckers looking at the traffic. But I think the human transcriber was probably using a re-speaking system, but it misunderstood rubberneckers. So yeah, commercial solutions for TV stations, they're currently replacing human transcribers in a lot of news stations. Those are ideal circumstances. They have very close microphones. The presenters know how to speak into microphones, and those all make a difference. But the demand there is such that closed captioning companies that are involved with this just can't keep up with the exploding demand over the last couple of years. And part of that's driven by increased deployment and implementation of closed captioning. But in cases where you're replacing someone, they're already captioning, it's just a cost saving. And so I think they're appropriate, and we're applying these technologies in different solutions already. Live captions for less important meetings, less important meeting rooms. Often what we'll do is take the live transcript and then within 4 or 8 hours go and clean it back up and make that the version that's used for on-demand subsequently. But it's still cheaper to have someone do that than have the live real-time transcription. And then also just using it for alternative technologies where you're just searching audio. If it sounds like it's close enough, and so you can actually use it for finding points within video where the technology might not otherwise be sufficient for actual live closed captioning. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay, if everybody can just join me real quick and thank everybody for their excellent speeches and informative presentations today. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. Okay, we're now going to move into the question and answer part of our session. If you have a question, please use the microphones on either side of the front up here. If you have a question, make sure you tell us your name, affiliation, and state you're from before you ask your question. Also, at this time, we'll open it up for any of the panelists. If you have any additional questions, you can also chime in between for somebody else. Something maybe sparked interest in what you heard today. All right, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the information. I'm not the techie part. I'm the person who's trying to get information. I'm Patricia Smith from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I'm a state legislature. So just this past session, I was capable of passing a tax. I serve on our Louisiana Commission for the Deaf, and that's taxes to take tax away from, to reduce the amount we're paying on our residential lines to put it on cell phones, to begin to look at how we can improve our access, the access for our deaf community to access legislature. So we did add some money in for captioning. We're starting all brand new, have no captioning whatsoever. We're using sign interpreters for any meeting where the deaf will appear and to testify. So we're starting brand new, but that money that we have in our budget will gain us some ideas on how we can get captioning, at least starting with our committee rooms. But I like what you said. Start and find out where you are, how you can improve your website. So are your presentations available for us to get them so I can pass them on to our IT persons, and that way they can contact you, especially if you're already doing it, where you started from, and be able to get some idea on how we start from scratch to be able to provide our deaf community the opportunity to tune in.
I think all the presentations will be available on the NCSL website.
Okay.
Also through the app if you downloaded the app.
Yes.
Also, this presentation was actually on a live feed, and that also will be available as an archive later, so that you can come back and watch everything that we talked
All right.
about.
Well, I thank you very much, because there's only one other thing I want to say. We also passed a bill on terminology. Our deaf culture doesn't want to be called hearing impaired, and that's what I saw in the description of this this session. So it might be wise to look at the terminology now. No longer hearing impaired. They feel they're not impaired. Many of them who are born deaf live in that culture. They're not. They work, they play, they have fun. They're teachers. They do everything. So they are not impaired people. So I think we need to look at changing our terminology as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Got a room full of IT people here.
So from the Massachusetts standpoint, we were just starting out as well. I think this has been a culmination for us in terms of the kinds of different technologies that we really didn't have any handle on. So it's great to see that, there are so many options available to you. If you are just starting out, personally, I'm very happy to speak with any person who you'd want us to reach out to from the legislative side, because we're still working through some of the kinks. So, we're definitely in this process. I think part of the things that we're working on from the Massachusetts aspect is we're trying to get enough of a process so that we understand what we need to do from a goals perspective, and then we can try to fine-tune that and find ways to either automate that, cut out some of the costs in that process, and find out whether there are other options and other solutions that are more turnkey. But that's something that I'd be happy to share info with. I didn't actually have a presentation on like the others panelists, but I can certainly put something together and make that available.
I know, Paul, you mentioned it real quick, was you said something about retroactively captioning old content. How are Bruce and Paul, how are you handling that? What's your kind of timeline on that? Something in Indiana we're dealing with is we've got video content back to 1998. 2017 was really the first year we captioned everything, including all of our archive. How do we go back and deal with that and do it in a cost-effective way?
Well, the logical way is to do it backwards. You start from the most recent, you work your way to the oldest archives. And then a lot of it has to do with the automatic transcription that we can do now with machine learning, like the guys mentioned. There's a company called 3Play Media. They're really big on this subject. They can actually take all of your archives and they can work through it. They have very reasonable rates. They actually start with, it's a two-stage process for them. They start with machine learning systems that generate most of the copy, and then they have somebody, actually a real person, review it. And so it reduces the amount of time that a real person has to actually look through it and scan it, which reduces your cost, so they can produce more content for less money. That's probably the way I would get started. Really, South Carolina is sort of in the nascent phases of this. We still do not provide any captions on our archives, which is something that we're really working on trying to provide. Last year, we did install equipment in both the House and Senate chamber that allow us to capture our finalized captions as a transcript. It stores it in an SRT format so that it's still usable with timestamps, and our goal is to start stitching that onto the archived files as they're added to our archives. So the first phase would be add it to the ones you're doing now. Second phase is start working backwards through your content to add it onto everything that you've done before.
Yeah, and definitely to dovetail on what Bruce just mentioned, we had the added benefit of actually having the cart services that I talked about earlier. So in my presentation, I mentioned that we had, communications access real-time translation. They actually provide a transcript to us within 24 hours of the close of session. It's not perfect. That cart transcription, that transcript is about, to be honest, I'd say about 80, maybe 85% at best. But the benefit there is that we also we actually partner with 3Play Media, which is the technology that Bruce mentioned, and it does significantly reduce the cost. If you were to start transcription from scratch and you just gave, let's say, a 2-hour-long video to a service like 3Play Media, it would cost considerably more to just fully transcribe that than if you gave them that file that at least gets you started. So for example, 80%, like Bruce mentioned, they'll run it through a machine, they'll try to get it to as high as they can, probably about 85, 90%, and then they'll have a human actually bring it up to 97 or 99%, and then a final reviewer will actually audit that, for the last version of that product to you. So we did have that added benefit. So if you are going to go the route where you are trying to, stream open captions, for example, you can actually leverage some things that you've already done in the past to kind of reduce the cost.
One other question I had was kind of around policy. Was it difficult for you to get approval from leadership to do the real-time transcription that was fully searchable online? Was that difficult? Did it take some manipulation on your part to kind of get that moving forward?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the legislature, based on the sort of the context of the whys that I gave, were very much on board with this. The legislature, again, they're looking at accessibility and transparency as two of the focal points for them. Because of the history of what we've been through back in 2007, with potential litigation, they just realized that this is something that they wanted to put focus on from a technology perspective. And they were fully supportive of that. I think anybody in the legislature, at least in terms of Massachusetts, they're really wanting to connect with their the constituency. And this is just another way that they can do that. And it's historical too. If you do this kind of thing, this is information that's going to be out there in perpetuity, and it allows you to, like we talked about, I think Bruce and Sanjeev mentioned it, Daniel mentioned it, is that, we could use this to shortcut some of the end goals and products that we have to deliver in other parts of the legislature. So, we could automate the journals that we have. There were a lot of things that we tried to do, but we just stopped just to get this sort of beta phase out. A lot of things where, you could turn hyperlinks within the text, not just to, a portion of the video or time slice of the video. You can have it pull out a context pop-up menu where you can choose whether you want to go to a different kind of resource or search to Google, something along those lines. And that's the kind of, multifaceted approach that the legislature wanted us to take on that, and they were very supportive. Yeah, so it wasn't actually as hard as you would think.
Good. How about remote sessions? How are you guys dealing with remote sessions that might pop up? So every now and then it happens for us here in Indiana. It doesn't happen in one of our rooms that has an encoder and is set up for this. How do you deal with that?
Me?
Yeah, either one of you guys.
A lot of our rooms are already equipped with equipment to be able to handle that. The Senate in general, all of those rooms have inputs for computers to be able to feed Skype or other remote technologies into the room, which carries audio and video. So it's accessible as a source in our production environment, and then it's also accessible as an audio feed into the room itself, so that people trying to interact remotely, they can do that. It's a little bit more of a challenge in our house rooms. We don't have built-in capability for that, but we do have the capability to wire it into our production workflow and then be able to work from there. Really, the problem is not more technology, it's more policy. Trying to get people to allow remote testimony, because then you have the problem of verifying who they are, where they're coming from, if it's a plant, or there's all these crazy political shenanigans that come up from questions like that.
Excellent. Yeah, in Massachusetts, that's the one area where, we're still not quite there yet. Our hearing rooms are, we cover all events, so I didn't mention this when I was talking, but, we don't cover just formal sessions. We cover anything that is agreed to be streamed or televised, and that may include committee hearings and, even special events. But we don't have any sort of room to testify.
Dora?
Yes, I'm Endora Servin from California. So for those of you who are doing this and you have it out for the public, if you're getting 90, 97%, whatever the percentage accuracy rate you do, are you getting any pushback for not, for how good it is or not good it is, especially with maybe places and names and multiple people talking, coming back? Or is it?
We haven't seen that, but again, we only provide our captions live. We don't have captions yet available on our archives. I'm sure if we had it on the archive, people would catch it more, because you really only have one chance to see it if it's wrong in our situation. But we actually do have a lot of very unique names in the state, so it's sometimes very difficult for the remote transcriptionist to know the spellings of a lot of our state locations and other people that are in the legislature. So it is a problem.
Yeah, one thing too is that, you could make it sort of like a disclaimer that, these transcripts are not perfect, even though they do go through, what at this current moment in time is, the best technology, and you have human, eyes actually looking at this, it is not 100%. We will try to make that disclaimer. This is so new for us that, we just pretty much align that launch with this event. So we don't know yet. I'm sure we will get plenty of feedback, hopefully both positive and negative on it. Part of the problem stems from what Daniel mentioned, which is, we struggle with incredibly long sessions, and I'm sure all of the panelists do, right? At some points, we're talking about 8.5-hour sessions that go throughout the night. So surely within that context, you're going to find some issues with the transcript. It'll especially come to light if you search for something and it's just not there or it's inaccurate. And we are kind of fearful of that. But if you take a step back and look at it as a whole, there's an onus to improve this and make this better, as long as it's a work in progress for us. Hopefully, the folks who use the website, use this technology will understand that.
We did get some feedback. This year was the first year we provided all our archive content. So we did actually take a step back and start making our own edits. And after we did it for a while, we figured out the common things that were happening. So we're able to fairly quickly kind of get back in and get those things fixed, because people didn't like to see their names spelled incorrectly. People didn't like to, certain words were just wrong. Sometimes the context was a little off. Generally, we didn't think change anything substantive. I mean, it was just basic grammar, basic changes, just to kind of clean it back up. But we do have lots of disclaimers on our site too. You'll see no legislative intent. Lots of phrases like that say, hey, you can't basically take this and put any intent on it. It is what it is. It's what we provided. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Jeff, I have a question for the three of you. Do you have a quantification of the quality level? Like, I know on the federal level, I believe the number is 98.6%. Do you have a target?
I know our provider likes to tell us 98%.
Okay.
We don't think it's that good. I don't know that we've got a number, but we know it's not that good. But we're striving to get it better. We just renegotiated a new contract with our vendor, just trying to make things a little bit better, having just gone through that this last session. But our target is to get it as best we possibly can. I think if we hit 98%, that would be pretty good.
Agree?
I do. I would also like to say, from a technology standpoint, if you know that being able to change the content of the captions is something that you're going to need to be able to do programmatically down the road, you're better off storing the captions as a sidecar file or SRT rather than embedding it back into the MPEG file that you have in your archive. Because you can actually have your script program, whatever you're using to do your searches and your replacements and all the fixes, it can actually do that on those text files very quickly and very easily and in a batch process, as Jeff mentioned. So if you know what the problems are, you can actually do a batch discovery and batch replacement all at once.
And that's what we do. We use this SRT file.
So Jeff, I had a question for you, and possibly for Daniel St. Because I know that Bruce isn't using Archive yet. But do you struggle with the types of browsers that the end users are using in terms of the actual, like maybe not so much even with Archive, but with live streaming? Like we've found that, you know, if you want to be HTML5 compatible and you want to use, let's say, a WebVTT file, that's not always an option that works for older browser types. Internet Explorer, for instance, I know Internet Explorer is right or wrong still about, at least when we do the analytics on our site, about 33% of our users. Any insight as to sort of how you're dealing with different platforms?
So we started with JW Player using Flash and ran into problems, and especially with some of the other browsers. We just moved to HTML5. We're seeing things going better, less issues. We're looking at something called MPEG Dash as possibly something moving to in the future. A couple of our guys are looking into that, but it's definitely an ongoing issue for us, just like everything else on our website is trying to make everything compatible across every browser so we can fit everybody's need. And we do get the calls on that stuff. It's surprising how many people are using an ancient browser that I haven't seen in 15 years, but they're still running it because they're still running Windows Me in an early version of Internet Explorer. I mean, and I think sometimes we kind of have to draw the line on that. But yeah, we've definitely gotten some feedback on that. So,
luckily, I think that a lot of people have actually switched over to newer browsers in South Carolina. We don't see a lot of people still using Explorer, so that's not really the main issue. The issue that we run into is that, at least for live captions, if you're trying to support multiple platforms, especially mobile devices, you're better off supporting what they call I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the term. It's the HLS form of captions rather than the RTMP or Flash form of captions. So the problem that you run into is that a lot of player applications don't support those same HLS captions. So we've actually still stuck with a Flash-based player. Unfortunately, it's the only one that we can find that actually still supports those native captions so that we can caption in one format and have it be universal across the board, working everywhere. So even though we have kind of an effort to get rid of Flash and move away from Flash, especially since Adobe has now deprecated it, they've abandoned it, we're still stuck with it to that degree because we haven't found a replacement technology that works as well.
Yeah, part of the features that we wanted when we partnered with our CDN was the ability to actually have sort of a DVR functionality, so that during a live session, if you were to view the session and you jumped in late, you could basically swing the sort of the marker earlier so that you could see what you had missed. And that's a feature that we had to just basically give up when we had to support certain browsers like IE, Internet Explorer, that will only take the Adobe HDS stream. The better players and the ones that are fully supported in the later browsers for HTML5, they seem to work very well. So we actually have an odd mix. You'll see over time that we have some code that looks at what kind of browser type you're using, and we'll have to kind of interject the right player based on that. It's unfortunate because in order to support every type of browser, you're actually limiting the functionality for a lot of those users. But until there's some sort of an actual consortium that gets things.
I think MPEG Dash is sort of aimed at that.
yep.
Yeah, the problem with MPEG Dash is it will probably never be supported on Apple devices, so you will always have to support HLS. So I think looking forward for us, we do support MPEG Dash, we do support HLS. The beautiful thing that happened last year is the container format, so the file format for the fragments, they got together and they're using the same file format. So the only difference, not talking about old browsers, old players, but going forward, the only difference is going to be the manifest, so the text file that specifies the fragments, and not the actual media files themselves. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel there, is that MPEG Dash, and I hope I'm not speaking a foreign language to everyone here. MPEG Dash and HLS, so both the Apple formats and the rest of the world file formats will be the same. The only thing that changed is a small file that shows how to deliver them. And both of them support the captions really nicely, but in your browser. So to answer your question, that light that you will see somewhere around 2018 is in video.js. So the pure JavaScript implementation of HLS decode has a closed caption decode in it. And it's the same thing. There's other libraries. So I believe Dailymotion is a big website for video. They put out an open source player that also supports, I think it's called HLS.js. It supports HLS with no Flash. And no Flash is a big deal. It's coming around the corner. So that's going to be the biggest impact on all of our lives, is getting rid of Flash, getting rid of Silverlight, Windows Media. It's all gone.
Yeah, the only browser that natively supports Dash out of the box right now is Chrome. So.
Do we need anything else?
The problem we saw, JW Player was the dominant video player for a very long time, still very widely used. It's fantastic. You know, all of the big commercial sites use it. They've got a very aggressive marketing and pricing model so that it's targeted towards, you know, big concerts, big movie studios. But they decided to stop supporting Internet Explorer 7. IE 7 by itself is a relatively small part of the market. You know, it's maybe the low single point percentages. And in some cases, our customers decided they were okay with that. But the difficulty became if you have IE configured with your website as its homepage, as a lot of your internal users probably do, IE in its infinite wisdom, even in version IE 11, decides, let's render this page as if we were IE 7, including breaking JW Player. So we have fallbacks to Video.js specifically for that, but we're sort of making the move away from JW Player entirely based on that, decisions like that, and the pricing model around it. Yeah, we have a pretty good solution, we think. We don't hear a lot of complaints. It certainly hits all of the major and minor browsers, anything you typically support, but of course it's difficult going back. You need Flash, is what it comes down to. And so players that drop support for Flash are difficult as well if you're also trying to get captions to, you know, IE on Windows 7. You know, IE on Windows 10 is maybe fine, Windows 7 is a different story. Same version. You know, it's little tricks here and there that come from sort of just the volume of looking at it. Hopefully not getting complaints, but actually getting feedback from those complaints and figuring out what happened.
I think maybe we've got time for one more question. Anything else? Anybody? All right. Well, just join me again for thanking all of our speakers for all their time today.